Welcome to Savage Minds. I'm your host, Julian Vigo. Today's guest is Peter Salerno, a retired licensed psychotherapist, trauma-informed educator, author, and nationally recognized expert on personality disorders and pathological relationships. He holds a Doctor of Psychology, a Master's of Science in Clinical Psychology, and a Bachelor of Arts in English Literature. He has received specialized training in both trauma treatment and the assessment of personality disorders, and has been trained in the administration and scoring of the Hare Psychopathy Checklist Revised, the global standard for evaluating psychopathy in clinical and forensic settings. Dr. Salerno specializes in the psychological assessment of personality pathology and recovery from pathological relationship abuse. He is the author of The Nature and Nurture of Narcissism and Traumatic Cognitive Dissonance, and is a featured expert in the Hulu series Ted Bundy, Dialogue with the Devil. His work integrates cutting-edge research with practical trauma-informed education for both survivors and clinicians. I welcome Peter Salerno to Savage Minds. I'm really excited to have you on the show, and maybe excited isn't the right word. I'm traumatized to have you on the show, but not you personally.
Yes, I hear you.
I wrote you because for the past 2 years, I have done something that my 20-year-old self would never have believed that I would ever do. And let me explain. I used to work in a Walden Books for a very brief period, and there you would find clients that come in and they ask for the self-help books. And my colleagues and I sometimes, again, I was 20, so please forgive me, we'd make fun of some of the book titles. Men Are From Mars and Women Who Love Men and Men Who Hate Them. And we would psychoanalyze both the books and the people coming. Some of them were nice, but some of them were like, ready for a therapist chair.
Yeah.
And you would see people that were really traumatized and actually went to these books in the same way that some people will go to Linda Goodman's Sun Signs and like just want to know what their moon's going to be in next week. Skip to 2 years ago when my life fell apart because I found out that the person I had been involved with had been living a double life. I mean, it's really crazy, my story. And the last 2 years of our relationship, while she was allegedly getting psychiatric help, well, this was all a theater. I didn't realize, in fact, at the time, what I was dealing with.
Yeah.
And over the 4 years of our relationship, I moved to Italy right before lockdown. In lockdown, found myself in front of someone who was another person, let's put it that way, but quite abusive verbally towards me and my children. And I'm thinking, it must be lockdown, right? It must be lockdown. Anyways, long story short, there was one person that I could actually talk to, and this was another journalist, and she had worked in a domestic violence shelter. And early on, she said, Julian, I think this person is a grifter, and you need to get the hell away from her. And we're in lockdown in Italy. You couldn't get away from Ted Bundy if you were locked up with Ted Bundy.
That's right.
Ironically, the same person told me over the last 2 years, I got through this listening to YouTube videos from Dr. Ramani. I discovered you. I discovered a few others, but you guys were my staple because I thought I was losing my mind. I was like, how can someone pretend to look for a job? I mean, this was one of the things I came across. How could someone be so evil as to steal my life savings? Like, I could not get my head around this, Peter, because it's not even about upbringing. It's about, oh my God, like, who does this? This is what I spent 2024 saying to myself, who does that? Skip to when this woman who provided great assistance to me, another journalist, she not only recommended that I watch the Ted Bundy documentaries, there are many, but she said, Ted Bundy, people thought he was a nice guy too, Julian. Don't think that these narcissists are people that go around just being mean to people. They know how to control this. And again, I was coming out of this relationship realizing that the person I entrusted with everything done to my finances was not at all what she pretended. In fact, there was a big act going on. And the one thing that struck me about your work, Peter, is that you, unlike many of your colleagues, do not believe that this is a kind of behavior that they can't help. And I find this very interesting because as you know, for the last 30 years, especially in our culture in North America, we've been trained to be nice and to be compassionate, and they just need mental health care. Don't judge the alcoholic, don't judge the person that does this. But the downside to all that is what I found myself in during lockdown, right?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you could begin maybe by discussing for our listeners, especially, maybe let's start off with the ABCs of the difference between narcissism and NPD, narcissistic personality disorder.
Absolutely. That's a very important distinction to make because culturally speaking, and even speaking just in broader like societal terms, there are a lot of people walking around who are not clinically diagnosed with NPD and might not even meet the full criteria for a personality disorder diagnosis, but are still uh, very narcissistic in their interpersonal relationships and dynamics. So we have to make a distinction between like a clinical diagnosis and something that is known as trait narcissism. Trait narcissism, it basically measures, who's walking around with these traits to the point where they're causing harm or significant distress in the lives of others, but aren't necessarily going to treatment, aren't necessarily receiving a diagnosis, but they have one or two even very persistent chronic traits, including exploitation, grandiosity, antagonism that operate in the general population. And so oftentimes it goes undetected because they're not necessarily impaired to the point where their lives are so unmanageable that they're seeking help. They're just walking around being this way. So there are a lot of people in the general population, the global general population, who have high degrees of, if we're looking at it as operating on a spectrum of severity, there are a lot of people walking around with narcissistic traits who might not ever necessarily get an NPD diagnosis, um, but who are acting very much like somebody with NPD, but they're high functioning enough that you would never suspect them to have like a mental disorder. So, and to your point, the example you used was Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy, I was featured in a documentary on Ted Bundy. There's a lot of documentaries on him. There's a lot of differing opinions about someone like that. But the to be honest, he went past narcissism and went into what we call psychopathy. Um, but he was able to function in society very well, and he was able to make friends. He was able to infiltrate communities. He was obviously able to get people to trust him very easily. He disarmed people with his charm and charisma for the purposes of exploiting them so that he could eventually do, the horrible things he did. But you don't necessarily um, see him walking around impaired, right? He was able to sustain relationships. He had a girlfriend for 5 years who had a daughter, and they didn't never suspected that there was anything wrong with him. I mean, they had in hindsight, they can go back and say, okay, yeah, there was some interesting things. He didn't show up for this, or this was kind of eerie, but they're not really putting it together in the context of the relationship at the time because he's functioning very highly and conducting himself in a way where he's very kind, where he treats people well. He actually was uh, part of he worked for a 24-hour hotline for suicide risk. So
Yeah.
he would talk people off the ledge literally, and he did a fantastic job of that because he remained calm and earned their trust and was charismatic enough to give them something to live for. So when you see someone who's capable of that, all while simultaneously sexually assaulting, kidnapping, and killing, you know, dozens and dozens of people, women, you wouldn't suspect that there's anything wrong with them, or you wouldn't necessarily consider them pathological because they're not insane. They're very aware of what they're doing. They know when to turn it on and turn it off. There's an intentionality to their behavior. There's a control and precision to when these traits get expressed. And so this idea that he was operating from trauma responses, or he was just dissociating and unconscious and not aware of what he was doing, or he was just reactive, not proactive. I've done
Mm.
a lot of research, and there's extensive research on the differences between reactive and proactive aggression, reactive and proactive um, narcissistic traits. So, um, to say that he wasn't aware of what he was doing, or it was simply a trauma response, is just not supported by any empirical evidence at this point in what we know psychologically speaking.
Yes, this is what this fellow journalist was telling me about. She spoke to me a lot about him and a few other serial killers. And
Hmm.
at first, when she pushed me to see the docs, I was hesitant because I thought, well, my wife isn't a serial killer. But then I saw them and I totally got what she was saying because the level of, I've actually wondered if there's not psychopathy involved in this person that has devastated our lives because I think it takes an enormous amount of something wrong with you. And I just don't know because I mean, devastating someone's economic life, lying to them about looking
Yeah.
for work, lying to their family about, she would go and tell her family and friends exact Darvo, what she had done to us. She flipped it. She,
Yes.
even during our divorce, went to get a warning against me for stalking. She's been stalking me until recently, like just the other day. It's like relentless. And you begin to even laugh at the situation at a certain point because you really, I mean, in Italy, what are they going to do? Well, there's two women. You wouldn't believe the comments the police have told me. Maybe she misses you. I'm like,
Oh, terrible.
oh my God. The horrifying thing about all of this is that this is a person who went and Darvoed things, trying to get this, what they call a monumento. It's a warning. So it's a
Mhm.
bureaucratic move. And she did all this in order to exploit me further economically in the divorce. But then it gets better, Peter. She's been asking to see me. Wait, you just said I did all these horrible things. Why would you want to see me?
Yeah.
And over, and it's relent. I had a dream about you. Oh, please spare me. And this
Mhm.
stalking is actually quite frightening. But at the same time, what we've been through, because again, if it had not been for lockdown, this person would have been packing. Like I would have been like, ciao. The
Yeah.
problem is that they're very good at exploiting circumstances and unfortunately compassion. And that's
Mhm.
where I fit in.
Yeah.
So the choice, I can see it because this person isn't behaving like this to the people she's also conning on the other side, lying to. And you know, what do you see as the root of this? Because again,
Yeah.
I read a lot of your work and you have worked on issues of genetic and biological roots, contrary to, again, many of your contemporaries that believe,
Mhm.
again, it's the age old nature nurture argument, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about some of the genetic and biological roots that you believe are behind? Is it only MPD or also narcissistic traits?
Well, I want to clarify. It's not nothing that I'm about to say or that I've said in my books is ever related to my personal opinion. I always make sure that there's research to support, the views that I share. What we've seen, it wasn't very long ago that DNA became, you know, something that we could actually test and understand and make sense of, right? So within the last 20, 30 years, there's been advances in sciences related to behavior in general, including behavioral genetics, evolutionary psychology, and then we've also been able to study neuroimaging findings, scans of brains and functioning and structure to determine, are there any structural physiological differences in certain people who behave in certain ways, or is it more so that these changes occur after they've been traumatized or abused, and that's what causes this behavior? And what we've found, surprisingly, is there are individuals who have biological underpinnings and genetic propensities for certain that are more at risk for certain traits, that regardless of environmental adversity, they're going to express those traits, and they're actually going to look for environments where they can modify the environment according to the traits they're born with, that are just inherent in them. And different people have different degrees of these traits. So the more, and this isn't just personality, this is all psychopathology and all mental health or mental disorder. So, for example, recent studies have shown that at the moment of conception, there is such a thing called gene copy number variations that occur randomly. There's nothing anyone can do about it. They occur randomly. They can delete, there's deletions, inversions, duplications, absence, for example, that can contribute significantly to the development of certain disorders. So they've actually identified gene copy number variations that happen at the moment of conception that give rise to schizophrenia, autism, ADHD, where it's not necessarily that something in the environment happens to make these things develop. It was going to develop no matter what. Environment certainly matters, but it doesn't necessarily make a difference when it comes to these variations. And it doesn't necessarily make a difference when it comes to the random variation of DNA in general. So human beings, like any other species, it's almost like there's a lottery involved in the randomness and chance of what can develop naturally, regardless of environment. What we see in individuals with NPD, psychopathy, just personality disorders in general, is they have enough of these DNA differences to significantly increase their risk of developing a personality disorder without environmental influence. Environment absolutely is significant, and yes, adverse environments and traumatic environments certainly give rise to certain reactive behaviors and defenses and things like that. But what we're starting to see is there's a lot of people who come from reasonably good upbringings or don't really have any adversity at all, who go on to, become serial killers and become people who exploit people financially, people who are very confident and very pleased with themselves in the sense that their self-esteem is high and even their self-concept is very high, and they still do these things to others. So we can't attribute a personality disorder solely to this idea that somebody has been wronged or violated or chronically abused, and that's why they're behaving this way, because there's so many exceptions to that idea. We've seen now that there's people who have certain genotypes that where they go out and select environments where they can exploit others, harm others, take advantage of others without any guilt, shame, or remorse. They can reverse the blame or externalize the blame. And a lot of this has to do with the random variation of traits, the random variation of gene mutations. But the way to make sense of it is some people are wired or motivated to exploit others, not connect with them. And I think just accepting that reality is something that is very difficult. So what people typically do is they say, well, they must have been really traumatized. That makes sense why they would be treating me this way. That can be true, but it's not the only truth. And so a large majority of the time, these individuals feel very good about themselves and they feel very comfortable exploiting others. And there's not necessarily this inherent hidden shame or insecurity that is being compensated for. It's oftentimes that these people very much are believing that they're entitled to treat people this way. And if you happen to be a victim of them, according to them, you should have known better, or you brought this on yourself, or you're making too big of a deal of it. So
Yeah, well, like when I wrote you and I said that for years, I thought when I would see narc online that they were talking about like Miami Vice narc, the Don Johnson character. I just thought, why is everyone talking about narcotics agents? I didn't know about this because then you have the antithesis, which is everyone using narcissism a bit too much. Like
Oh yeah.
everyone's a narcissist. And that just, no. I'm a very precise person. I dislike hyperbole, especially when
Yeah.
it comes to serious issues. Okay. I don't even like the armchair psychologizing Trump's a narcissist. He's insane. Well, that might be, but we're not in a position to know that. Not really, because he's also a theatrician.
Well, we're yeah. So just to talk on that because that's such an important topic. Um, there is no way to. I mean, you can speculate and you can draw conclusions and you can identify patterns of behavior, but even the term narcissism, well, the term NPD, the NPD is really designated and exclusive to clinical settings. It's not something that we can just go and tell people, oh, this person has narcissistic personality disorder, because without a formal assessment and without a clinical relationship, that's really impossible. That's like an oncologist saying, oh, that person's skin is ashen over there. They must have cancer. You don't do that. You need to be seen and assessed for that diagnosis. However, we can draw conclusions about people based on their enduring patterns of behavior, where we could say, yeah, this person seems to be operating from the perspective of having, some pretty, obvious traits that they've carried with them in their lifespan. And there's evidence of their, especially if they're a public figure, there's evidence of their history to suggest that this is an enduring pattern. Even that, though, we can't necessarily say that's a diagnosis. So I just wanted to clarify that. Of course, we can identify behaviors, but we can't diagnose people. Yeah.
No, no, I completely agree. In fact, well, I've done a lot of work and training in psychoanalysis.
Uh-huh.
I'm very hesitant about these armchair theories. I mean, we saw it during lockdown. Everyone was a immunologist, and everyone became a Russian Ukrainian specialist. It's like basta,
Sure.
no more people. Let's
Yeah.
keep to our corners. I will never ever come on this show and talk about accounting. I know nothing about it and I would be terrible at it. But one thing, related the way that I was pulled under, it was like an undertow in the ocean because my narcissist was not a grandiose narcissist. This was
Yeah.
someone who was very meager and very seemed kind, a beautiful, physically beautiful woman. That
Hmm.
might play a role into why she has, as Dr. Romani calls them, the flying monkeys around her. And
Yeah.
it's amazing how people will buttress these. I believe she's a covert narcissist. Again, I'm not in your field, but after what I've been through, really insane stuff because you give an inch, they take a mile, they make an
Hmm.
apology on Monday. The next day, they're freaking out because your 4-year-old child wants to sit next to you on the sofa. And you're like, what's wrong here, folks? And it
Yeah.
was, I was dealing with someone that I knew was dysregulated. I assumed it was due to lockdown, but as lockdowns ended, because here we had almost 2 years of lockdown, not lockdown, lockdown, not masking rules and all that craziness. And then when I learned that this person was finally seeing a psychiatrist, that was cause for celebration. I'm like, yay, she's getting help. That was even fake. That was to sort of buy a backstory for the legal route for the divorce. Yeah. And it was just phenomenal. I mean, the psychiatrist's letter to the court for our divorce was about me. Totally would have been thrown out in an American court. I
Hmm.
ended up denouncing that person for defamation because in Italy, defamation is actually a criminal act. But it's like really crazy the kind of stuff that goes on. These people will use anything around them to paint you in a bad light because I think they realize that it's either you or them. It's like you're in a Western film.
Well, they need you to be wrong. Part of this is self-justification. I'm glad you brought this up. So it's like a twofold um, process here inside the mind of someone like this. One is they want to do the things they want to do and they don't want any consequences. And so they feel entitled to mistreat people, to lie, to deceive, to be covert, to have a double life, to financially, exploit, and then move on without any consequences. They feel very entitled to do that.
Yeah.
The second thing that comes up is if anybody gives them any sort of pushback, even if it's indirect. So even if you go see a therapist or a psychologist because you think that this person may have abused you, if they get word of that, they're going to start um, self-justifying why it was okay to do what they did and why you are problematic for misperceiving their intentions. Even though they know full well that their intentions were malicious and wrong, they don't want to be seen that way. It's less about them caring whether or not they're bad and more caring about whether or not people think they're bad.
Excellent point.
So the first step is I'm going to do these things because I feel entitled to do it. The second step is somebody just has created a problem for me because they don't like what I did. I'm going to internally self-justify why it was okay to do it. And then I'm going to have to punish them for slandering my reputation or even suggesting that what I did was wrong. And so this self-justification component is very important. Like they will be very comfortable finding a way to convince themselves and everyone else they either had to do what they did or it was okay to do it because you're the crazy one. And and
Yeah.
it's a brilliant narrative. And the more charismatic and the more cold precision or meaning the more these people can operate without much arousal, they can just covertly act dumb and play aloof and play naive. And I don't understand why this person's so mad at me. I mean, I didn't do it. I just loved them and they just went crazy on me. The better they are at that, the more they get away with this.
That's exactly the MO that she did with me during the last years of our relationship, where she was living between two places, getting help, allegedly. And the story would be, I'm coming back as soon as I get better. And then I learned later it was the opposite to the family and friends. And the crazy thing about it all is that when she realized that I had been speaking to a hotline about domestic violence for some of the stuff that she was doing, she freaked out. And I thought, why? Well, it took me a long time. This is where the cognitive dissonance sets in because that was me. 2 years, I could not understand why someone would do what she did. It just does not dawn upon me. And it's not only because I was raised in a certain way. I think a certain kind of
Mhm.
decency, even if you weren't raised that way, you can actually accrue. I've have friends who learned things in the
Mhm.
university and came from very troubled backgrounds. To a degree, we could argue that all of us have certain troubled backgrounds. Very few people have these pristine little house on the prairie backgrounds.
Absolutely.
But what really kills me is that she was so good at weaponizing. I mean, the ability to lie is Oscar worthy, seriously. No, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
so impressive if it weren't so horrifying. The fact that she's completely disconnected from the fact that she tried to put the law against me, lost on that because I had to get a lawyer, submit evidence that she was actually committing perjury. It's called
Yep.
calumny in Italy. And yeah, and it's
Calumny.
horrible. And the fact is that even after that, there's a disconnect there, Peter. Don't you miss me? I dreamt about you last night. Are you alone? Are you with someone? Oh my, if I posted something to social media, she assumed I was with that friend. It was like romantically insane.
Well, that's the colloquial or pop psychology term of related to those types of behaviors is hoovering, where it's like the vacuum. They try to suck you back in with they put these little things out to see if there's enough reinforcement or for you to take the bait essentially and get back into they're very interested in how often you're thinking of them, good or bad, good or bad, and they actually value you thinking bad about them. That's something that's very interesting. They don't see it as, oh, this person thinks I'm a rotten human being. They think I am so important, I am occupying this person's mind. That's all they think. So they do those little tests to see how much they're on your mind, and maybe um, get back with them just so they can discard you and exploit you again. Um, it's not always necessarily uh, planned out. It's oftentimes opportunistic. I know a lot of narcissists because I used to work. That's another thing that's important to point out here. I used to work with this population in clinical settings. I used to work with personality disorders. So not only do I, help people who've been victims of them, but I used to sit with them and speak with them and see if I could help correct some of these behaviors. And what I noticed is they are very um they get very excited and happy when people are thinking about them, but um it doesn't matter if the thinking is good or bad. And so a lot of this is opportunistic. Let's just throw some things out there to 5 different X's and see which one takes the bait. Um, so there's a lot of this attention-seeking behavior where like who is still thinking about me? And they have this way of being able to edit out all the things they've done to you. And they're not thinking, I wonder if this person's hurt by what I did, or I wonder if this person is suffering. It's more like, I wonder if I can still get this person's attention. So they do a lot of the things that you just described because it makes them feel good to know that they're still on your mind.
It seems like these people just don't have a conscience. Like nothing, nada.
Conscience, yeah, some of them are. Some of them are completely lacking in conscience, remorse, shame, and guilt. It does operate on a continuum. So some people, um, I would say the ones that are worth worrying about are the ones. So we have a continuum of mild, moderate, severe, extreme. Okay. And I would say the ones that are worth worrying about are the ones that are severe to extreme in the pathology, meaning they're so socially maladaptive, they don't really care too much who gets hurt by what they do. They just want what they want. Um, and so, yes, some of them are completely lacking in conscience and will never care about how much they've hurt you. And even your pain doesn't register for them as something that matters. It's almost a curiosity to them. They're interested in it, but they're not necessarily like feeling that the pain that the lack of empathy is where this comes into play. Is they're curious that you're hurt or they're curious that you're mad, but they're not upset about the fact that they hurt you, if that makes sense.
You're listening to Savage Minds, and we hope you're enjoying the show. Please consider subscribing. We don't accept any money from corporate or commercial sponsors, and we depend upon listeners and readers just like you. Now, back to our show. No, it totally makes sense. Again, I spent really from lockdown, I think I fell into a depression and did not know it. I compare myself to, like my father was a functional alcoholic.
Uh-huh.
And I was a functional whatever I was, because I think by the time her behavior kept repeating and I would see the ups and the downs and the apologies, but the repetition of the abuse, I was thinking, I think internally, I just had to protect my children. I was able to keep her from my children, but the flames came at me. And at that point, still in lockdown, I thought, well, at least it's just me. And I'm a very strong person. This is the irony of this. I'm not a weak person at all. Even my wife would tell me this. But the funny thing is that she would chip away at that. And it's not like the scene from Thelma and Louise where the guy's being really abusive to her and insulting her because he feels superior. Well, it was the inverse in a sense. She would denigrate my education. She would denigrate my ability to speak Italian. Everyone tells me my Italian is very good, but she would denigrate it. Anything she could. And would even denigrate the fact that I was a single lesbian with 2 kids, and you want to be the bourgeois single lesbian. I'm like, what the hell does that have to do with anything? It was weird.
Yeah.
The kinds of insults that would try to frame me in a negative light, because I assumed, honestly, at the time, I assumed she was insecure. I assumed irrevocably wrong as I was this, because I'm a good-hearted person and I'm willing to, obviously there was a lockdown. It was insane. So that was my go-to. I thought, oh, she's freaking out because we're locked in. But even then, the report that she had made to the police asking for this warning said I locked her up during lockdown. I'm not making this up. Now, the crazy thing is that the police read this and they think it's crazy too. Mm-hmm. But you know what I mean? The law here is so weak on this, because when it comes to couples, they don't want to get involved. And I'm thinking,
Sure.
She accused me of being locked down. This is insane. Like, and accused me of being pro-lockdown when all of my writing on the subject, I was the biggest anti-lockdown person out there. I was one of the first people in independent media to start really going at it because of being in Italy and seeing the way that this affected people. The cues, you'd see elderly people afraid to be near other people, which is really not good for their socialization. Elder people don't get out of the house as much as younger people do, and they need to have eye contact. They need to not be afraid of everyone, and you would see it in their eyes because that's all you could see because of the double masking that was going on then. Oh my God. Yeah. So I was in this horrible state, and if it had not been for that journalist, a colleague, a wonderful person who's since become a friend, she saved my life. Mm-hmm. And she didn't know me from Jack because, again, my narcissist wouldn't let me, and I said it wouldn't let me, would become enraged if I mentioned friends or family. Oh my God, I couldn't. You think your family's so wonderful. And I was like, well, doesn't everyone, if they're in contact with them, like I would hope so. And the anger was beyond comprehension, Peter. It was almost as if it was Don Quixote in the windmills, and you didn't know when a new windmill would pop up. I'm just wondering, the way that this affected me is that I first became depressed, but then I tried to rationalize that this was lockdown or that you've written about, she must have had a horrible childhood. She told me things about her parents. I thought, oh, it must be that. It must be this other.
So let's talk about that real quick, because I'll just ask you, historically, in the context of the relationship, does this person lie to you?
Well, that's the thing. It's like, I didn't know she was lying until I knew she was lying. And the fact of lockdown, it kept me from seeing the sky. Like in a normal relationship, right, you'll know that person has a job because you'll meet their colleagues at the Christmas dinner. There was none of that for 2 years. So all I had were the lies she was telling me, which I thought was the truth, right?
So here's why this is important, because when someone like this goes to therapy, oftentimes it's after their life has decomposed in some way, meaning like they've gotten a threat of divorce, or their kids will stop talking to them, or they got fired from their job. So when they lie and seek therapy, it's interesting because if they're lying to you, do you think they're going to lie to the therapist? So this self and people know how therapy works. Like nobody goes to therapy thinking that they're going to try to explain to the therapist that their life is incredible. What they do is they talk about the things they know therapists want to hear: trauma, adversity, pain, sadness, anxiety, stress. So these people already know half of that language, and they're going to self-report that they had a terrible childhood, and that's why someone wants to divorce them, or that's why somebody took out a restraining order against them, or that's why their boss fired them. So, and then because therapy is for the most part intended to be a collaborative venture in which you solve problems together, the therapist is going to assume this person is not taking their time out of their schedule to pay me to lie to me. However, a lot of people lie in therapy. The kinds of people who lie in therapy are the kinds of people who lie in their personal life. So they won't tell you the things that you need to know because they want to create an impression for you of who they are so that you validate that it's okay to be that way. So they lie to their significant others, and then they go and they lie to their therapist. And then everybody creates this understanding that, hey, listen, this person has so much adversity in their life. They're reacting to life this way. Give them a break. Understand. Give them a second chance. Have empathy. The people with severe personality disorders exploit this. And then they get professionals to back them up that there's nothing wrong with them. They've just been wounded. And it justifies all their behavior all over again. So self-reports of trauma in therapy have to be dealt with a bit of skepticism on the part of the professional, because every once in a while you get somebody who is a pathological liar.
Yeah, it was an enormous thing to live through, but the traumatic cognitive dissonance set in when right a month, not even 3 weeks before I had a surgery, scheduled, and this person claimed she was getting better and was going to support me through the surgery. I get a request for a divorce, and I was floored. This unleashed a series of knowledge that I would come across that this person had been living a double life, because in this letter was all the Darvo, and I'm shocked, okay, to be quite honest with you, because I thought, wait a sec, I've just spent the past 2 years supporting someone who claimed she had serious mental health and anger issues and jealousy and rage issues, which we were all privy to firsthand. And now this is all, I can't even begin to tell you. So I was in shock. The way that this traumatic cognitive dissonance manifested itself is that I had to first answer to a lot of things and do research about this person, which I did. So the journalist and anthropologist, I got to work, I started to find out. And then the request for a warning came, and that's when it fell apart. Because that's when I realized in this request that this person had been living completely adult. I suspected it before, but then I had the confirmation. This person tried to even anticipate the date of our having ended our relationship. I suspect because she was already working on finding her next victim and probably had told her newer girlfriend that we were already broken up, right? And I put a lot of pieces together. What really floored me is that I could not, Peter, I could not accept that this was a really not great person. I kept thinking, even then, well, she can't mean this. She must be so sick that she can't mean what she's saying, right? Because it's like what you said earlier, people want to believe. I think a lot of us who have what might be called a positive default, we want to believe that people are fundamentally good and that if they're bad, it's just a one-off or it's a bad moment or it was the alcohol. It's really hard for me to accept that someone is born like this and thrives off of creating havoc and pain, who's basically dishonest from A to Z. I didn't want to see that because for me, my mind is very much about looking at complexities in my work. I'm not a black or white person. So It's very hard for me to accept that someone is pretty much rotten. That's not my makeup.
Right.
So I'm wondering if you could talk about like how traumatic cognitive dissonance fits into this, because in a way I wonder if I wasn't the perfect victim for this person, because I was compassionate, I was generous, I was patient, and then this person took all of that and as they say in Italian, girare la frittata, to turn the frittata over.
Traumatic cognitive dissonance is an interesting thing because the way I differentiate it, and yes, absolutely, you're a prime victim, but it's not because of anything that's wrong. It's not because of anything that's wrong with you, and that's the important distinction here. It's not like you asked for this, or you had it coming, or you magnetically pulled it into your orbit because there's something in you that does that. That's not how I understand what happens here. What happens is, if you're somebody who is normal, like you're agreeable enough, you're cooperative enough, you're collaborative enough, you're loving and trusting enough, which is what we want to be. We don't want to be too much of anything. We want to kind of try to, like you said, be less black and white and a bit more down the middle as best we can. You're going to assume that people, for the most part, are trustworthy and are worth your time and maybe deserve the benefit of the doubt or maybe deserve a second or third chance. Traumatic cognitive dissonance happens when, well, first of all, cognitive dissonance is when we have two opposing or contradictory thoughts, ideas, beliefs that are kind of happening simultaneously, and we don't know which one is true or which one we want. So we make a decision to resolve the dissonance. And this can be as simple as, I don't know what I want for lunch. Do I want this or that? And you get a little bit of internal conflict about it because you're not certain. So to resolve it, you make a decision. Okay, I'm going to choose this instead of that. Problem solved, dissonance gone. The problem with traumatic cognitive dissonance is you're not having this internal conflict in your mind just because your mind created it. You're having it because somebody else inserted a dilemma inside of you and you don't know what's real or not, so you can't resolve it. So it's not as simple as making a decision like this is this is what I want for lunch and then I'll just have what I wanted the other thing tomorrow. It's I don't know what's real or not anymore because this person is intentionally giving mixed messages. So your mind is constantly in this state of ambiguity. It's not that you're that you're weak or vulnerable. It's just that you're a normal person who wants to collaborate and cooperate. And so yes, these people will vet you to see how much cooperation you have, how many times they can pull the wool over your eyes before you start to detect something. But they're also simultaneously implanting thoughts and ideas that don't actually exist into your mind. And then you're forced to try to come to terms with what's real and what's not. So, um, I don't know if that answers your question or your thought, but I just want to be clear. People don't just walk into these abusive relationships because they have poor attachment or poor social skills. It's not that at all. It's that these people vet everyone and then they stick around the people who have an emotional tolerance for forgiveness and for the types of people who want to understand things and ask questions and are curious and want to find a middle ground and want to work things out. And so they actually end up preying on people who have a lot of um, emotional resilience. It's not weakness. It's resilience.
Wow. This really took me for a loop because when I told my first friend in London that I told, he said, "Oh my God, Julian, I'm so shocked. You're so strong." And funnily enough, that's what I thought the whole time. I thought during lockdown, I thought, okay, we'll just handle this. There's something wrong with her. We'll deal with it together. And little did I know, I was in a relationship by myself because this other person was not. I was like a walking ATM machine, plus a
Mhm.
few other things. And this person took advantage of us in every way, not just financially. I mean, the whole family, we're a family when she was in a good mood and the horrible things that would come out of her mouth that I dare not repeat here
Yeah.
when she was not. And then you begin to think, are they bipolar? Like, I mean,
Hmm.
just like
Yes.
I wasn't even, I didn't even have the time to do a lot of Google searches on mental health issues because I had to work constantly. This person also faked looking for work. I'm not joking. It's
Right.
funny
Right.
now, but it wasn't at the time because my finances got shot during lockdown. I had savings
Yes.
that are no more. She was, oh, but all and promises and nothing. It was all a con. It was, I mean, I
Yes.
would have rather, honestly, Paul Newman and Robert Redford in the picture, like
Uh-huh.
not this, not this. And the thing is that you talk about some people struggle to leave these relationships because they're waiting for certainty. In my case, well, the hoovering is a very useful tactic because it keeps you even from waiting because sooner or later they're going to come around with their false promises.
Hmm.
And I kept thinking, okay, she's going to get this next visit to the doctor. Maybe she'll learn something. And I try to talk about what she's learned in the process. There are some things I have to do yet, she would say. Well, what things? I'll tell you next time I come down. But it was like that. It was, Easter eggs that weren't really opened. And
Yes.
this was a kind of hoovering as well, I now realize. And then when, of course, the divorce thing happened, I'm like, and in the letter, it also claimed that I wouldn't let her have her passport. I'm like, please come and get your things. Please
Yes.
don't lie. But no, I'm not coming to get my. So, I mean, the person's done herself under, legally speaking, because I have literally dozens of these messages. But the problem is that the disconnect, then the stalking, it makes you quite fearful because you don't know if they know that they are sort of acting crazy, and
Right.
and you don't know when the other shoe's going to fall because is she a Ted Bundy? Like it's
Uh-huh.
actually entered my head. Is this person capable of more violence than we've seen?
I want to talk about that too, because I'm glad you brought that back up because it's interesting. First of all, a personality disorder doesn't make you a killer, but the same personality can have completely different expressions. So some people enter into white collar crimes or economic financial crimes where that kind of fraud to them is self-justified. Other people enter into murder and sexual assault and torture and they self-justify that. It could be the same personality disorder. It's just that the way it's expressed is going to be unique depending on the individual. So you could very much have somebody who has a mind that operates like Ted Bundy's mind, but they're not necessarily going out serial killing. They might just be going out serial um, financially exploiting, if that makes sense. But the traits and the mechanisms and the self-justification are going to be all very similar, in that person's structure and functioning. It's just that they've expressed it behaviorally in a different way,
I could see that.
which is scary because that means that they're both very callous and lacking in remorse and lacking in empathy. Um, it's just that they've chosen to use that in a different sort of, they've chosen a different method, if you will.
Yeah, I can see that, absolutely. The messages I've received from this person are also they've been extremely sexual after saying things to the police that would disavow such desires. It's incredible, the 180.
Mm-hmm.
And when you realize that you were with someone for many years and then this behavior, and then you realize they're lying. The looking for work thing I found out because of, again, the warning she asked for, where she says she made a cry for help writing an SMS to an ex-girlfriend who very likely she was never finished with, or maybe also exploited, right?
Yes.
And when the police came to our house one day, she says, "Oh, I have to give my leave, my notice of leave on this volunteer position I have." And that wasn't true. Basically, she exploited me economically so she could keep that window dressing on her CV, what little work she's done in her life, actually, as I also learned. Her store that she had was a front, that everything about her was a front. And it was really shocking to learn this during lockdown. It was awful.
Yeah.
And then to find out that this person said all these horrible things about you, not just to her family, but then trying to get this warning. And then they're asking you to make love. Let's make love. Ugh. Like, I call her now gay conversion therapy. Like, if someone wants to be straight, I'll send you to her because it'll work. And but it's just crazy, Peter, because
Yeah, it is.
we've read Hansel and Gretel, we've read all those fables that are quite horrific, but I never expected to find myself in one, especially because she's not hard on the eyes. But I'm
Right.
wondering, I'm not that stupid to be taken in by a honey trap or.
Yeah.
How is it that these people are so gifted? Like, again, Oscar winning, maybe we should go higher, BAFTA level performance. It took me in. I believe it took her psychiatrist in, her flying monkeys in. Do these people ever figure it out? Or do these narcissists always retain the flying monkeys and their cadre around them?
I think what they do is when some people figure it out, they just move on to another harem or fan club, and they can have this uncanny ability to reinvent themselves in ways where it's unbelievably convenient for them, and then they can just kind of, you know, people aren't typically going to do a deep investigation into the history of somebody when they like them. So what they do is they reinvent themselves with a new community, and everybody just expects that what you see is what you get. So even the flying monkeys that are turned on to the possibility that this person might not be who they say they are, they just go to another community anyway and create more.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I had one human support in this country that my ex went to, apparently defamed me to, and that woman took a side. Not
Uh,
mine, by the way.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. And then she accused me of going to people while she did that. Like, I have nobody to go to. Thank you. I wouldn't. And the thing is that the isolation then, even in the breakup, and the funny thing is, like, I began telling you about working in the bookstore, and all those books about codependency started to come out in the late 80s. And I remember I was one of those people that, I don't know if I victim blamed, but probably, I can't remember, when I would see people or hear people talk about these relationships with abusive people, not even necessarily narcissists, because I just thought, well, you just leave, right? And then there's a famous case in England, Sally Challen, and she was released from prison because she murdered her husband, okay? And she was acquitted. And I didn't agree with the decision at the time, and I could beat myself up for that now, but I thought, and I said this to feminists, I said, but her husband didn't touch her. She could have taken to the door. Well, you don't understand. I'm like, there's the door. Well, now I'm in it, okay? Now, I didn't kill, obviously, my ex, but I can see how someone would, because I'm a person who's extremely resilient. I lost my first child in 2007. I never thought I'd get through that. Miraculously, I not only did, but I had 2 children after that, which was a gift in many respects. Your book, Fit for Off-Duty, is used by the FBI Academy. How does the psychology of a narcissist in a domestic setting mirror the tactics of a criminal personality?
Personality disorders don't create crime, but the same personality, like the same mechanisms and structure and functioning of a personality, disordered personality, are present in somebody who ends up serial killing versus somebody who ends up covertly just exploiting people in interpersonal relationships domestically. So it's the same kind of wiring and functioning and entitlement and self-justification. It's just that it's oftentimes expressed very differently. But this is important because it's just as dangerous. It's just as dangerous. You know, the physical, the difference between what we're realizing now is the difference between physical abuse and psychological abuse. There really is no difference. The structure and functional damages and injuries that occur to the nervous system and the brain and the self-esteem are almost identical now. We've seen the research that shows that. So, I mean, obviously the differences matter, but when we're talking about somebody who's being criminally abused, either like physically, versus somebody who's being psychologically covertly abused, but there's not necessarily a crime. The consequences in the victim are similar emotionally and psychologically, and the mechanisms that give rise to those different expressions of behavior are similar in the predator.